we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, wherever you're watching, please write and review. If you can give us a few stars, as many as you can, we would really appreciate it. It really helps us out there. If you ever wanted to reach out to the podcast, let us know about any topics or anything that we ever talked about, or if you ever want to come on as a guest too, please reach out to us at the Bigmark Pod or at the Bigmark Podcast on our Twitter or Instagram. If you ever wanted to donate to the podcast, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/BigmarkPod. If you are watching on YouTube, hello, and like and subscribe to the channel, like the video, and again, share with all your friends. We want to continue to grow the Bigmark podcast community, and the only way we can do it is with your guys' help. So I really appreciate your time too. I appreciate you guys coming out today and listening, and whatever you're doing right now. I appreciate you bringing me along. I'm really excited about today's episode because it's kind of been a couple days in the making so far, because I wanted to talk about spring gardening, which is really, really exciting. You guys are probably going, hey, it's like early March. What the fuck are you talking about? But spring is right around the corner. Summer is just going to be soon behind. And again, there's a lot of things that, we can do to prepare. So for any of you who don't know, or any new listeners, I'm an avid gardener. At the apartment I was in last, I had access to a wonderful garden in the backyard, and it was tons of fun to tend it and bring it to life. And it was a pretty fucking shitty setup, and built it back up to some type of glory, or built it into some type of glory, depending on how you look at it. And yeah, had a lot of fun. Had a few years to try a couple different strategies, and it was great. And of course, just when you feel like you're getting used to it, things change. And I'm in a new, along with the new studio, I'm in a new place too, and different gardening setup. So the backyard here is excellent. It's a little bit more of a patio type scenario though, because it's all paved in. There's a little garden section, but I don't know if it's ideal for a vegetable garden. So I guess I could try some stuff over there. Why not? But the problem is that it doesn't get a lot of morning sun. I'm not even really sure how much afternoon sun it's going to get. So, sun to sun, obviously you want good sun, but the afternoon sun, especially getting into the summer, deep into the summer, can be really, really hot, and it kind of tends to just kind of exhaust the plants a little bit more. They don't, yes, they get some light requirement there, but again, you want as much sun as possible, right? Like that's really key. So again, for any new gardeners out there, whether it's indoor plants or outdoor plants, you definitely want access to southern facing sun, or a south facing window where your plants are going to get 8 hours minimum. Usually is usually the minimum. I think I've seen some people push it to 6, but you want to get the most out of it. You want to get if you can get 12 hours of sun, then you're gonna be loving it. But in my circumstance here, I don't necessarily have that luxury. Again, the old place, the garden was shaded probably, but mostly until, well, I guess in the height of summer, there were some areas that probably got maybe 6 to 8 hours. Again, it wasn't much, because living in the city, obviously buildings get in the way, let alone, other trees and things like that. So here's very similar. Trees, buildings, all types of shit's in the way, but a couple really good southern facing windows inside, which means that there is some possibility of getting a good amount of sun. So the place that I have figured is on the opposite side of where there is like a little garden bed, but it is a place where I'm going to be able to, like put pots of stuff. So I'm thinking about doing that. But again, it's always interesting when you are faced with a new challenge that way, and you're able to try and problem solve. Maybe that's the male brain, maybe that's my personal brain, maybe that's whatever the problem solver. But I've always really wanted to. Well, not maybe I should say always, but because my grandmother was into gardening, my mom liked gardening, even though she wasn't able to devote as much time as she'd like to it. I guess you could say I've had a green thumb, and I've had indoor plants for a while. I've always had a peace lily ever since I saw Hot Fuzz. But at least more recently, I should say, more specifically, I've been really, really enjoying gardening, and again, the problem solving aspect of it, because you're met with challenges a lot of times, right? Let alone the size of your backyard or whatever you want to call it. There's issues with pests, there's soil requirements, there's different life stages of the plant, especially if you're growing from seed. So I'm going to talk about growing some things from seed today, because that's what I'm doing right now. And when you are doing that, every stage of the plant's life, from seed to harvest, you have something to do with, and it's really interesting. It's like holistic, I guess, in that sense, but you really get that sense and that feeling of you're really a part of something, especially when you grow something that you get to eat. Growing flowers and that all and things that look beautiful, that is also great. Don't get me wrong. And that's part of gardening too. It's if you go back, I did do an episode on just general gardening. And I did talk about companion plants and plants that encourage pollinators to come in, which are flowers and beautiful things that might not necessarily be edible, but they do play a role in that. But again, when you do end up growing a plant that you get to eat, you get to enjoy that a little bit longer. And I've grown cucumbers, which I love to grow, and I pickle them, and then you get to enjoy them all years to come. I think I still had some jars left from a batch from 2 years ago, and then still have a ton from last year. So super awesome, super fun, and you get to really it's return to the roots. I don't want to say that. I didn't want to say that just because it's too easy, but obviously human evolution and where we got to as a species really came about through agriculture. And being a nice city boy as I am, I never really got as much exposure to like farming per se. But again, you get that chance of putting your hands in the dirt and really connecting back to the earth. And it's funny because, like I said, in certain circumstances, you might have to use pots, you might have to raise beds, things like that, where you're creating some earth. So, but still, there's something about it. There's some of the soil and, where that came from, and just the earth and everything. So last year's setup was, like I mentioned before, was excellent. I loved it. It was much bigger, well, not much bigger space, but much more usable, like garden kind of space. But I did a few things. I did tomatoes, 4 different types. I did cucumbers. I did onions, which were a huge bust. Onions from seed, they fucking had mad stalks, but the bulbs were so tiny. And it was kind of the same thing that happened with garlic. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know if my soil was too compact. Anyway, I'm not going to try and do that this year. Although I have been doing this really cool thing. Anyone who's interested, if you ever get like green onions, scallions, whatever, if you cut them down and just like stop like right at the white part, you can actually put that in water and they'll fucking grow back, like just like lettuce, just like all that stuff that you can like save. And it's not a bad way to keep things going. Carrots I grew, but they all got fucking eaten by squirrels, which fucking sucks. And they're the goddamn bane of my existence. Again, if you go back and listen to the gardening episode that I did, you'll hear about my hatred for these animals, and it looks like there's some around here too. So it'd be really interesting about what I can do about these fucking squirrely bastards, literally. Kale, wonderful plant to grow, especially in Canada. For all of our listeners that are in Southern Ontario. I don't know about Northern, but like I think you could get away with it because it's quite a hardy plant. Growing kale is so good. It grows all through the winter. Just super hardy. You can't really go wrong. And I had this really, really good variety. It was kind of like a rainbow kale almost. I think it was West Coast Seeds. They did really good seeds, but that was awesome. And then jalapenos turned out really well. And I actually saved one of the plants. I potted it in a little pot, took it inside, and I'm going to see if it grows back to life. I don't know. I kind of neglected it. And there's this awesome channel, and I will reference a lot of the stuff I learned is actually from his channel. But Brian Lowell, I think his name is, but he runs Next Level Gardening. Check that out. It's on YouTube. Really, really good resource there. Tons of awesome videos. He has this whole playlist on just growing tomatoes alone. And again, a lot of the stuff I learned was from there. And he talks about, overwintering your jalapenos, your jalapenos. And it's an interesting way because you really like it's an interesting technique, I should say, because you cut down a lot of the leaves. And like I said, check out his resources. Super, super cool. I will continue to learn through his processes, but a lot of the things I've tried and one of the techniques I'm going to talk about today, I learned through his channel. So go check that out. Next Level Gardeners. Next Level Gardening? Gardeners. Paul Gardeners. Anyway. So like I said, with the challenge that I have in the backyard, really, as I mentioned, the only true level of recourse or let's just say the only real thing, the only weapon, the only thing I can possibly do to battle against that. No, the only thing I can really do in the backyard is use pots. So pots and pots and pots. I've used fabric pots before, so even last year, because I had some usable space, but I wanted to maximize it. I grew my tomatoes in like 10-gallon fabric pots, and I thought they did really, really well. There's like pros and cons to fabric pots. Obviously, one of the big cons is it's fabric, so it doesn't hold moisture that long. You're really dependent on the moisture, the capability of the soil itself to hold moisture. But the one cool thing about fabric pots is that it air prunes the roots. So what that means is the fabric is very permeable, it's very breathable. So the roots, as they're growing in the soil, once they reach the edge or very close to the edge, they stop growing because they sense that air and they kind of think that, that's like the end of the soil. So they kind of stop there. Whereas in some plastic pots, they'll just keep running around the plastic and keep trying to find more and more water. And that's when you get plants being root bound and things like that. Not always a major issue when you're just growing like an annual, because sadly, the winter kills tomatoes here. I don't know. It'd be really interesting. That'd be a good experiment. But they get pretty fucking dead in the end of the summer and winter. So, anywho, that air pruning really has an interesting effect, I think, and just helps develop a really consistent root system. And and that's going to be my approach again. I thought about building a small raised table, actually, like, you know, you can do a raised bed with like right off the ground, you know, you put some big planks or some fucking railway ties or something, you fill that with soil, and then you have a raised bed. Or you could do like a gardening table, like a raised table or table bed. Anyway, and it's completely off the ground, high up. You don't have to bend down as far. I thought about it, but again, unfortunately, I only have so much room to grow. So pots. That's gonna be the goal. And in said pots, I'm gonna go with 4 different types of tomatoes again. Different, I think. Two out of the 4 the same ones I did last year, because I got these awesome seeds, and they're pretty interesting. I'll go into like the specifics a little bit more after I kind of talk about the tomato seed technique. But really cool tomatoes there. I'm gonna do cucumbers again because I want to do pickles again. So that means I got to do dill. And I have this mammoth dill, which is awesome. And it's like that big, thick, tall dill with the long stalk and like the little flower head, not like the really frilly, like green dill that you're usually used to seeing. Because that other mammoth dill is the best dill for pickling, in my opinion. And then again, we'll see how those jalapenos did. The ones that I've overwintered, so to speak. You never know. Again, I'll see. It's going to be interesting to try and find a plant or find something, some vegetables or something like that does do well in the shade. Maybe that's going to be the goal this year, is just kind of checking that out. And again, I think kale surprisingly is going to do really well again. It's such a large leafy green. We'll see how that works. Thinking. Again, this is why I was so excited to do today's episode, because it just gets me really excited. And, you know, there's a lot of beauties in gardening, and like I mentioned before, that connection you have with the earth, and just sticking your hands in it and going out there and tending it and checking it out every day or even every couple days, and just watching things grow. And I mean, I think there's something primal, I guess, about it. But again, that brings us back to those agricultural days where that's what we were dependent on. We knew we were more connected with the weather. We were just more connected with, you know, it gets you outside too, which is always excellent. But it's just a time where you get to kind of, you know, relax. And, you know, I recently listened to, because in my drive into work, I was, you know, listening to audiobooks. And I recently listened to the Lord of the Rings complete series, and they talk about Samwise Gamgee, who is, you know, Frodo Baggins' gardener, as they call him, but obviously his best friend, and gets him through everything. But they talk about the role of a gardener in times of peace becomes the most important thing, you know, where a soldier in times of war or whatever is most important. A gardener in times of peace is important because they are there to grow things and think about things think ahead about things, I should say, and look into the future and say, I'm going to plant, you know, the most important thing is planting a tree that you're never going to enjoy the shade of. And that's, of course, the duty of a gardener. And yeah, it's just tons of fun. I've been really enjoying it. And sometimes my excitement gets me into trouble, because I have learned through Next Level Gardening, great channel, again, check it out, that you can start some of your seeds indoors, give yourself a little bit of a leg up on the competition. Now, don't get me wrong, especially if you're just getting into gardening and you're listening to this, kind of trying to learn a couple things, don't be afraid of buying, especially tomatoes. Don't be afraid of buying an already grown up plant that they have in the store. The way Brian does things on Next Level Gardening, it's gonna supercharge whatever plant you have, and it's gonna be amazing. And again, it's always important to look ahead. In Hamilton, Ontario, at least for everyone else here in the city, shout out. But this goes for anyone in the Hamilton area. Our last frost day is May 10th. So as long as you're planning around that day, that you're going to probably plant about a week after that, or a couple days after the last frost date, just to make sure that there's no other, unseasonably cold days. Just make sure, keep that in mind. Look in your area. There's almanacs. There's all types of resources online that'll tell you when your last frost day is. So plan around that. And then get yourself a little grow light, because it's going to help. It's better than just a bright window. That bright window's bare minimum, but with the grow light, it'll really, really help. And again, it'll give you just a jump on things, especially if you want to grow from seed. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of plants out there that do like to grow just right in the ground, just directly sow them. They don't like to get transplanted when they're young and all this kind of shit. So keep that in mind. But if you're going to grow tomatoes from seed, try this technique. So what you're going to start with is a solo cup, regular solo cup, red, whatever. Doesn't matter. It can be used, unused, just washed and ready to go. The most important thing is you got to put some drainage holes in that. So drill a couple holes in, cut a couple holes, whatever you want to do, get a couple holes into those cups. And then you're going to fill it only about a quarter full with planting soil, seed starting mix, either or. And then you're going to plant your seeds in that. And what's going to happen is that seed's going to germinate in that little bit of soil. It's going to grow up. And as it's growing, the cool thing about a tomato is that along its stem, anywhere along its stem, you'll see it's kind of fuzzy. All those little hairs that are coming off are potential roots. So wherever that stem touches the ground, because a tomato plant has evolved to kind of snake across the ground, and wherever it's touching the ground, it's going to root down. So the idea is when you've only filled the cup up so much, you can actually backfill into that cup and fill up, as long as the leaves are still exposed to the tomato, you fill it up, and then it's going to start shooting out roots from that stem all the way down. And eventually you're going to have that whole solo cup completely filled. And that's going to have roots all the way through the cup. And you're going to have an excellent, excellent root system, which is really important, for your tomatoes, because some issues with tomatoes down the line, something called blossom end rot, is actually a lack of the tomato actually taking up calcium. And that's not necessarily that there's not enough calcium in the soil. That's probably because it's underwatered or not regularly watered, or the root system isn't developed enough that it's able to pull in what it needs. Now, again, Brian's method's awesome, so check it out. But when you are going to plant your tomatoes, one of the best things you can do is get rock phosphate, which is just it's like a powdered chemical thing, I guess you could call it, but it's like a fertilizer. Yeah, that's what it is. And you throw that actually in the hole that you're going to bury the tomato in. So after these have grown, they're nice and big, they're strong, it's ready, it's past your frost date, you're actually going to go plant them in the ground. You throw a little rock phosphate in the soil. Don't really mix it in the soil, just have it in the bottom. And again, with that strong root system you're going to put it on, it's going to go right on that rock phosphate, and it's just going to be able to suck up all those nutrients. Water, water, water. Most important thing with tomatoes, not only that you keep them fed, and my buddy B-Rai always told me, think about how, what tomato and all the water and, how juicy a tomato can be. You want to make sure that you're getting that water into that tomato. So you're going to have to keep watering it, make sure you're on top of it, but consistently. Because what happens is if you're inconsistent with the plant, it's going to go from a drought condition to, well watered. It's going to suck up all that juice, and sometimes if it's been too long, you're going to start getting, the skin's going to start to crack and things like that, which you want to avoid. Also, you want to make sure you're keeping most of the leaves away from the surface of the soil, because that's where a lot of the pathogens and mildew and molds and things live, are on the surface of the soil. And when you're watering it, if it's splashing up on the leaves, it can transfer a lot of those diseases up to the leaves. So make sure you kind of prune the bottom 1.5 feet or so of the tomato plant. There's also a really interesting cordon technique to keep the tomato growing up, which is covered on Next Level Gardeners. But check it out. Really interesting way to use kind of a string method. Hang it up over kind of a trellis, and that just keeps things all solid. But again, keep those bottom leaves away from the soil as best you can. And again, depending on what style tomato is really important, you got to always keep that in mind. You want to first off know if you're growing a determinate or indeterminate tomato. So a determinate tomato is like a Roma. It's going to grow to a certain size. It's probably going to be about 3 feet. And at that point, it's going to start putting out all of its fruit within like a couple week period. Once it's done that, it's going to die. That's a determinate tomato. An indeterminate tomato are the really tall ones that can just grow and grow and grow. And as long as your growing season allows you, you can grow an indeterminate tomato fucking forever, I guess. But again, if you're living in an apartment, if you're living somewhere where you don't have all the space available, be really careful with those indeterminates, because they can get out of control really, really quickly. Now, some of the ones I'm doing this year, again, I'm doing 2 ones that I did last year, which are really cool. My stepmom Andrea gave them to me when she was cleaning out some of her seeds, but they're like, I don't know where she got them. They seem like pretty cool, like artisan, if you will. But one of them is a black Altai, which is actually a Russian tomato. Really, really interesting. It's kind of like almost a little bit like pear-shaped, which is like very, very interesting. It's indeterminate, so it's going to grow up as high as possible. The Trèfle, which is actually a Japanese tomato, and it has a really, really interesting color, really, really dark into this interesting kind of like dark green color. Again, I think about it because that, Russian, Japan, they all have like relatively northern climates depending on where you are. And it's going to be really interesting to see how those do. And they did really well last year too, don't get me wrong. But again, I was just kind of getting used to them just because they're a little bit different. But I'm really excited to see this year's crop. And then a couple new ones I did this year. I did a San Marzano, which is similar to the Roma. It's determinate, so it's gonna only grow to a certain size, but it's gonna be interesting for canning. So I'm gonna try and make like sauce or just like preserve the tomatoes themselves somehow, which will be really cool. I've never done that before. I'm looking forward to that. And then I tried this new one called an Ace 55, which is like, it seems like it's pretty GMO'd as fuck, which is okay. It's not, it doesn't have systemic pesticides in it or anything like that as far as I know. Anyway, but it's kind of disease resistant. It's another determinant, but it's disease resistant. It has like a tough skin, so it prevents cracking sometimes. Again, as long as I stay consistent with the watering, I shouldn't have to worry about that too much. But those are going to be the tomatoes I'm doing this year. I'm doing a small English cuke for my pickling, because that's what I like the most. Even if you let them get a little bit too big, they don't get overly big. You can cut them into spears. It doesn't get crazy. But I found that they were the best pickle. Mammoth dill again. And we'll see. Kale's going to be on the menu, and we'll see what we can do in that little shady part of the garden. But please follow along if you're an avid gardener. If you've never gardened before, please talk to us. Please reach out in the comment section, in my DMs, wherever you want to hit us up. I want to hear about your gardening story. I want to see what everyone else is doing. I want to compare notes, and I'm really looking forward to it. I hope the some of the things that I learned before can translate and kind of help me fill in some gaps. And yeah, big thing I'm doing right now, I'm watching outside, trying to just determine those areas and make sure where I think there's going to be best coverage. There's going to be is the spot, I think, and I'll keep you posted. But again, follow along. Thank you so much for listening. You know, like I said, if you ever wanted to reach out, let us know. And I do want to hear about your gardens. Hit us up on our DMs at the Bigmark Pod, at the Bigmark Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to our channel, share the podcast with everyone. If you ever wanted to support us, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. And yeah, have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Great night, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever it may be. Thank you so much. Love you all. Happy gardening. Peace.